This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Help others discover UCTV podcasts by leaving a comment or rating for us in iTunes. Also, make sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube original channel, UCTV Prime, available only on YouTube. This UCTV podcast is sponsored in part by Audible.com, your destination for the widest selection of digital audiobooks available, including many by guests you've seen on UCTV. Audible.com is offering UCTV viewers a free 30-day trial subscription and one free audiobook download. Just visit audibletrial.com/UCTV to sign up, and thanks. The Sam and Rose Stein Institute for Research on Aging is committed to advancing lifelong health and well-being through research, professional training, patient care, and community service. As a nonprofit organization at the University of California San Diego School of Medicine, our research and educational outreach activities are made possible by the generosity of private donors. It is our vision that successful aging will be an achievable goal for everyone. To learn more, please visit our website at aging.ucsd.edu.
Tonight we are thrilled to have Vicki Newman here tonight speaking with us. Mrs. Newman has been involved in nutrition and behavior change research at UC San Diego for more than 35 years and has always focused on wellness and disease prevention. She is currently an associate clinical professor in the Department of Family and Preventative Medicine. As the Director of Nutrition Services for the UC San Diego Cancer Prevention and Control Program, Ms. Newman manages the Healthy Eating and Living Program team of lifestyle counselors and assessors who work by phone with study participants in San Diego and around the country. We are so thrilled to have her here tonight, so please welcome Ms. Vicki Newman.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm delighted to be here and to talk on this topic. It's a topic near and dear to my heart, as I'm a senior as well as you. I think there's lots of very exciting research, and I'm going to try to weave together some really practical guidelines here and a little bit of update on the literature. We study the effect of lifestyle on disease process, mostly focused on cancer. So we have a Help for Weight Loss study that is focused on women who are overweight and at risk for breast cancer, should you know anybody that might want to participate in that. And we also have a study that's looking at the effect of diet on progression of early stage prostate cancer. So I have flyers up in front. If you're interested in either of those, you can pick them up at the end. And I also brought a copy of our cookbook called Food for Thought, Healing Foods to Savor. We sell the book for $20, and all the proceeds go to support our Healthy Eating and Living program. So I think what I'll do is maybe just pass around a copy, and you can kind of make its way around the room and see if you're interested. We sell them for $20, and I'll be here at the end if you're interested. Thank you. Okay. So without further ado, what we're going to be focusing on tonight is talking about energy balance a little bit. I think one of the biggest challenges as we get older is since our metabolic rate goes down, we actually don't need as much food. So the food that we choose really needs to be of high nutrient density. And so you're going to hear me, describing what that means, just to add to what you already know. We also struggle with this whole issue of oxidative damage, because just living, just even metabolizing our food, causes metabolic byproducts that cause oxidative damage, which does damage to our tissues. So that's where you hear a lot about the importance of antioxidant nutrients, and we're going to be talking about foods that are rich in those. I'm going to be saying something about inflammation and an anti-inflammatory diet. Little bit about immune functioning and certain foods that help in the whole detoxification systems in the body. Of course, we'll talk about skeletal issues. It's really more than calcium, but it's something that we all are concerned about as we get older. A little bit about the nutrients involved in mood and memory, and then a little something on telomeres, because they've been in the news lately. Okay? So first, on energy balance, you've probably heard over the years that there's been a lot of research on lab animals and small things like worms indicating that calorie restriction improved longevity. And a recent analysis of many studies has indicated, at least in adults or in humans, that calorie restriction probably isn't that helpful in terms of longevity. And I, for one, was thrilled to read that because it's hard enough as we get older and our metabolic rate decreases. You know, we have to really keep cutting down the portions of food that we eat in order to stay at a healthy weight. And that becomes really challenging to get all the key nutrients that we need for optimal functioning. So just for example, if you were normally at about 1,800 calories and you had to restrict what this former data used to indicate would be like a 30% restriction, you would have to keep your calories under 1,300 to be at that. It's just almost impossible to get all the key nutrients that you need when you're that low. In fact, you really need 1,600 to 1,800 calories per day of pretty energy or nutrient-dense food to get all the nutrients that would really be necessary for optimal functioning. So I think one of our big challenges as we get older is holding on to lean body mass. So that's kind of where the exercise component comes in. And nature has this kind of relentless wish, it seems, to, as my son would say, wants to recycle our molecules. So we do have a tendency to lose muscle mass as we get older. And we really need to work against that by doing, you know, weight-varying exercise. And if we keep our muscle mass optimum, then we require more calories because our metabolic rate goes up. So we get to eat more food. So, you know, that's a good incentive to exercise. So kind of along with this whole energy issue is this concept of circulation as really being key to energy. And the more energy and the more circulation we have, really the more life we have, you could say, and probably the better we feel. And for those of you that do acupuncture or go to various what we call complementary and alternative medicine practitioners, they talk about qi, or energy. And I like to think about it in terms of kind of the dance between exercise and what we eat. And both of those are important in this concept of circulation and energy. Regular exercise helps to keep the blood flowing, and it also helps in waste removal. And the blood, of course, is what delivers nutrients to our tissue, but it's also what takes away the toxic byproducts. And the other thing that I've come to realize, which helped me do exercise regularly, is moving is really important to draining the lymph system, which is kind of like the body's, you know, sewer system. We need to move our body to move the lymph, and that's really important. It's a good reason to be exercising regularly. And I guess the other thing about exercise, just quickly, is, and you've probably been reading this, it's not just a nice bout of exercise once a day, but it's really exercising even for 5 minutes every hour that turns out to be much more important than a big bout of exercise infrequently. In terms of kind of the nutritional component of circulation, it's really the diet that we've been hearing about for a long time. It's a diet that's lower in fat, but not necessarily as restrictive as we once thought. And you'll be hearing me talk a lot more about the quality of the fats that we eat and the balance of fats as being important. But we do know that the saturated or harder fats tend to make the blood thicker, and therefore we don't have as much circulation, and that is kind of an issue. We also want more plant foods to get more protectors, and those are what are going to give us those antioxidants to protect our tissues and protect the lining of our blood vessels so that they keep on doing a good job delivering nutrients and taking away toxins. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about fiber because that's really important for the digestive system to work properly to get that waste out of our bodies. So a concept that helps me lately think about all of this is living more in what's called in sync with our genes and trying to eat less processed food and eat more food that's underprocessed and has a good array of these protectors in it. If we think about our genetic heritage, we used to exercise pretty regularly. So we need to move our bodies and protect our muscle mass as much as possible. And it's good to, as I said, to move more regularly through the day. These plant foods that are the most protective are the ones that have what I call big color and strong flavor. So I'll give you some examples of those later, and you can be thinking about that. We're also going to focus on healthy fats. Carbohydrates. One of the things that I've realized as I've gotten older is I have to really be careful of carbohydrates, even whole grains. And the problem is, as we get older, we like the sweet taste of carbs, but those are the ones that we probably need to cut down as much as possible and focus instead on getting carbohydrates from vegetables and from fruits in their whole form rather than juice. Beverages are an issue, even the non-caloric beverages, and so we need to choose carefully. And another thing that's good to keep in mind in terms of being in sync with our genes is to allow ourselves to experience hunger at least 30 minutes 2 or 3 times a day, rather than just constantly be eating, you know, to kind of let everything rest. Okay? So there's a really great book that you might want to read called Supernormal Stimuli, or How Primal Urges Overran Their Evolutionary Purpose. It's by Deidre Barrett. And it is a very helpful book in helping us to understand how the current food environment is very not helpful in terms of guiding us to the right choices. And a lot of the processed foods that are so prevalent today actually act almost like addictive drugs. And there's some very interesting work. I cited one of the ones that I just actually saw this afternoon. But even the non-caloric beverages, actually when we take those feeling like we're doing a good thing because it helps with weight control, those have actually now been shown to increase our wishing or searching for more sweet foods. So for a long time, I've kind of wondered why people keep using non-caloric sweeteners, because they've never been shown to actually prevent weight gain, but somehow we still think somehow they're going to. And now they've actually shown that they may actually be leading us to eat more, which is worrisome. The high fructose corn syrup sweeteners are also an issue. and they're found just all through processed food. And you may have read something about this, but it's good to realize that the increase in these high fructose corn syrup sweeteners have really tracked along very clearly with rising obesity rates. And part of the reason for that may be that when we get more fructose that's not in something like a piece of fruit that has fiber, that fructose doesn't tell our body that we've gotten energy. There's a delay. And so we keep on wanting to eat. So it's a good reason to try to really reduce processed foods, and especially processed foods that have been made with these high fructose corn syrup sweeteners. So we talk about a plant-based diet as a diet being the one that we'd all like to be working on. Doesn't have to be all plants. A little bit of animal food is good, high-quality protein, but we really want to look at our plate and see mostly vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans on it, and maybe just a little bit of, meat, fish, or poultry, or some dairy products. The plant foods give us these phytochemicals, which are the chemicals produced by the plants to protect them from damage from the environment. It's those phytochemicals that give color, taste, and fragrance to food. And so think about how pleasant it is, to eat a plate of colorful, flavorful vegetables. Nature guides us to those foods that give us the nutrients that we need. These plant foods are also filled with antioxidants and anti-inflammatory components, and they also help very much in the detoxification systems in the body, particularly the sulfur-containing vegetables. You've all probably are already eating kale. You know about cabbage and broccoli and arugula, but all of those cabbage family vegetables that have that sulfur bite, that tastes kind of like mustard, they actually increase the activity of detoxification enzymes in the body. So the more of those you get in, the better. And I think the other thing that's good to think about in terms of plant foods and vegetables, for example, is environmental stress actually makes the plants put more of these protective chemicals into the plant. It's the plant's way of trying to protect itself. So if you think about, if you've ever had arugula, from the farmer's market that has like little nibbles out of it from the insects that are biting on it, it'll have a really strong flavor because the plant has tried to put more of these compounds into the leaves to dissuade the pests from eating it. And those strong flavored chemicals that it's putting in, the plant's putting into the leaves, actually are very helpful for us. They're helpful in detoxification. So the guidance is to get 5 to 9 servings of colorful and flavorful fruits and vegetables a day. And the range is based on your body size and caloric intake. So little people need 5 servings. If you can see how tall I am, I'm supposed to stand here by the mic. I'm about 5'7", so I'm kind of a middle-sized person. I need 7 servings, and people that are taller than me probably need 8 or 9 servings. A serving is a half cup cut up fruit or vegetable, or if it's something like raw spinach, it would be a whole cup, because when you cook it, you know how it mooshes down. And the more colorful the plant food that you're eating, the better. So you want something that's colorful all the way through. And I always pick on zucchini, but zucchini's green on the outside, which indicates that it has a lot of carotenoids, but you cut through it and it's colorless. So you'd much rather go with spinach or broccoli or something that's green all the way through, or yellow squash or a carrot, rather than something that you cut through and it's colorless. there's no bad fruit or vegetable, and the more you eat, the better. But colorful all the way through is your very best bet. So when you think about color, you think about, oranges and greens and purples. The orange colors and the red colors have a lot of carotene or carotenoids, which are the raw material from which your body makes retinol or vitamin A. That's critically important for your immune system to work properly, and it's really important for the health of your epithelial cells, which are like your skin cells. They line your gastrointestinal tract and your urinary, genitourinary tract. So a whole lot of our body is epithelial cells, and that retinol made from carotenoids is really important. When we do studies, we ask folks in our studies to eat enough colorful fruits and vegetables that the palms of their hands get a little bit on the orange side. So that's kind of a quick and dirty way for you to determine if you've taken in enough, because your body will make retinol from the carotenoids, and then once you've kind of filled up the tank, it will start to store those in the fat pads in the bottoms of your feet and the palms of your hands. And then after that has been exceeded, and you can't store any more, then you'll start to poop out orange, and that's fine. It just means that you've filled the tank, okay? So colorful is good. This is a whole list of cruciferous vegetables. So arugula, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, all really wonderful sources of these sulfur-containing compounds that help in detoxification. And please note at the bottom rutabagas and turnips, because it's winter. And these winter root vegetables, we've sort of forgotten about rutabagas and turnips, but we need to kind of rediscover them and start putting them into our soups and stews. It'll add a nice richness, and it also adds these protective compounds that are really good for us. You'll notice that the slide says best to eat raw or lightly cooked. This is especially true for things like broccoli. When we overcook, think about cabbage. If you overcook it and you smell all that sulfur in your house, so that's indicating that it's not going into your body to do you good. So undercooking is a good thing. Okay, and then citrus fruit, it's really nice if you could actually eat the orange as opposed to always trying to get your vitamin C from orange juice. Because when you eat the orange, you're getting a whole lot of other nutrients besides vitamin C that are very protective and important, including some wonderful types of what we call gelling fibers that are very helpful. So this was just one study that was recently published, and interesting. It came from the Nurses' Health Study, and they actually evaluated 74,000 women, tracked them for 12 years, and one of the things that they noted was that they came in at an average of 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. Those that increased their fruit and vegetable intake went up to the higher part of that range, up to 9 servings a day, actually had benefit in terms of weight gain. There was much less obesity. And those that cut their fruits and vegetables, which would be kind of a normal thing that people often do when they get older and move less, there was actually more obesity. So there was benefit to the fruit and vegetable intake. And this was in young adults, not older adults, but I kind of loved it. This is also a recent study just published and out of New Zealand. And they actually they found that the young adults that they studied, approximately when they were getting more fruits and vegetables, they actually had a positive effect on their mood and in the following day. And so I thought, another good reason to eat fruits and vegetables, okay? Fiber-rich foods we know are helpful. We think of them as being important for gastrointestinal functioning. They're wonderful sources of these phytochemicals. I think you probably have heard a lot about the glycemic load, or the effect of food on the rise in blood sugar after the meal. When we eat a meal that has more fiber in it, we have less of an acute rise in blood sugar, and that's a good thing in terms of diabetes risk as we get older. We also, of course, feel full on fewer calories, so there's less chance of gaining weight. We know it's very important to get fiber in terms of normal bowel function, and certain fibers are very helpful in controlling cholesterol levels, and so that's beneficial in terms of cardiovascular health. And I guess the newest thing with fiber that we've come to appreciate recently, have you heard this term gut biome? You know, this new appreciation for this kind of wonderful set of bacteria and other things in our gastrointestinal tract. And it turns out that the soluble type fibers that we eat are actually food for some of these, you could call them probiotic or the healthy bacteria in our gut. And so they actually feed those bacteria, and the bacteria then in turn make substances that help keep the lining of the gut healthy. So, you know, we think of fiber as just kind of like a brush that goes through and comes out the other end, but there's certain types of fiber that actually feed those gut bacteria and keep our gut healthier and happier. And one of the things that we've come to appreciate is the important role that a healthy gut plays in immune functioning. When we have dysfunction in our gut, we actually have compromise in terms of immune functioning. So keeping a healthy gut, and you certainly hear a lot about it, you know, they're always telling us to use these various yogurt products like Activia. But the truth is that if you get soluble fiber on a regular basis, you're also feeding those healthy bacteria and keeping a better balance in your gut that helps to keep your gut happy. So how much fiber do we need? We need 25 to 35 grams per day. If you could get even more than that, that would be fine. Quick rules of thumb are, you could say there's about 2 grams of fiber, sometimes a bit more, but you can average 2, for every serving of fruit or vegetable. So if you're a 5-a-day fruit and vegetable person, you're going to get 10 grams of fiber from getting your fruits and vegetables in. If you're a 9-a-day, you're going to get 18, you know, so the more the merrier. Whole grains are going to give you 3 grams on average per serving. And a serving of whole grain would be a slice of 100% whole wheat bread, or a half a cup of cooked grain like oatmeal. Do any of you ever cook wheat berries? Yeah, good. If you haven't, try that sometime. That's the wheat berry or grain that's, you know, unchanged, and you cook it up like you would brown rice. It's a wonderful source of fiber. It makes a really nice pilaf. You can put celery and onion and some other vegetables in, and maybe toast up some seeds like sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds and make yourself a kind of vegetarian pilaf. Or you can eat it cold the next morning with grated apple and raw almonds and some raisins, and it really makes a wonderful breakfast cereal that's incredibly high in fiber, and you'll have to chew it a lot. So, you know, for those of us concerned about our chin line as we get older, you might actually feel a little sore because you have to chew it so much. So that's a good thing to try. Cooked beans, peas, beans, or lentils, give you about 6 grams of fiber in every half cup cooked. One of my favorite beans that I like to cook from scratch is mung beans. Have any of you tried boiling up mung beans? So some of you, good. So, you know, we think of mung beans as just bean sprouts. You know, that's kind of the way that we are used to eating them. But they're just those little, you know, they're small green round beans, and they cook up probably in about 40 minutes like lentils do. They're delicious if you don't let them get too mushy. Once they've cooked and softened, you can toss them with extra virgin olive oil. And I like to put in the zest of a couple of limes and a little salt and pepper. And it's just delicious. And you can make a sauce later with fire-roasted tomatoes and put it over pasta. You know, you could make it in a soup. You can cook up enough sort of for the week and do different things with it. So trying to get some beans in every day is a wonderful way to get in extra fiber for bowel function. Beans also are a good source of this soluble fiber that the gut bacteria like. So sometimes people ask me, how do you determine if a cereal product is a whole grain product? And the way that you determine that is it should say whole, sprouted, or malted wheat or grain as a first ingredient. If it just says wheat flour, that means white flour. So that wouldn't necessarily be a whole grain product. And another way of determining it is if it gives you at least 3 grams of fiber per serving. So that's kind of your rule of thumb for a whole grain. I like to use this slide kind of as a wake-up call about salad bars, because really lettuce is not a good source of fiber. So it's wonderful if you can make salads that actually have chopped vegetables in them. And if you go to a salad bar, try to put as many vegetables on your plate as possible, and only if there's room left, use a little bit of lettuce. So it's interesting to realize that a half a cup of kidney beans, like you'd get on a salad bar, has the fiber equivalent of about 8 cups of lettuce. And you know, like none of us are going to eat 8 cups. So try to think about, you know, those Mediterranean chopped vegetable salads? Try to do more of those to get extra fiber into your diet. And with regard to soluble fiber, your goal is 5 to 10 grams a day out of that 25 to 35 total fiber. And the soluble fiber lowers cholesterol levels, and it also helps to feed the bacteria, as I talked about. So the cooked beans, the half cup is going to give you 3 to 5 grams, which is, you know, almost your goal for the day. And if you can eat a whole orange, okay, and I don't mean necessarily the outer peel as well, but try to get some of that white inner peel when you cut the orange, that's going to give you 2 grams of this soluble fiber. Flax, which you see at the top there, is a great source of fiber, and it's so much better if you're going to, you know, be interested in those omega-3s that they, you know, tell you to eat your flax oil to get them. So much better for you to actually use flax seeds, grind them up into a flax meal, because then you're going to get the healthy fat and the extra fiber, which is really important for health. And you can see some other choices, but if you do a nice job of eating your fruits and vegetables, you'll get the soluble fiber that you need. So a couple of words about glycemic load, because as we mentioned before, you want to try to have a diet that has a low glycemic load, which means a diet generally that's higher in fiber. But the other thing that's really important as far as glycemic load is that you pay attention to particle size. So I have to give you an example of oatmeal for, you know, just to get this across. Old-fashioned oats or Scottish oats would be your best choice if you really want to get the full benefit from oats, from the whole grain oats. Once you get into the, you know, the quick cooking ones, they've reduced the particle size so it cooks quicker. And as you reduce the particle size, you you kind of lose the benefit of the fiber, because you're going to have your blood sugar levels go up faster. And if you talk about the instant oats that come in those packets that have sugar added, you kind of don't want to think about those as whole grains, actually. You know, that's more like a dessert, you could say, because it's going to raise your blood sugar really quickly. So glycemic load, a high glycemic load diet, which would have a lot of refined carbohydrates in it and be low in fiber, is correlated with obesity, which then actually increases insulin resistance and increases the tendency toward adult onset diabetes. And we know that a diet that has a high glycemic load increases the chances of diabetes. There's also a connection with cancer risk. As your insulin resistance goes up, your insulin levels and insulin-like growth factor go up, and that can actually drive the growth of cancer cells. So, you know, we think of glycemic load as it relates to diabetes, but we probably also want to be thinking of it as not a great thing in terms of cancer risk. And then the higher the glycemic load, the more problems we tend to have with blood lipid levels. There tends to be a relationship with higher triglyceride levels and higher LDL cholesterol, which are both correlated with cardiovascular risk. So if you want to have a diet that has a lower glycemic load, then you go with non-starchy vegetables, okay? So that's pretty much all vegetables except for things like potatoes. Fruits are fine. They actually have a low glycemic load. And that's because when you eat fruit, you're getting the fiber that comes with it. Whereas when you take fruit juice, you've lost the fiber. All grains, even whole grains, are considered more high glycemic load. So if you're really concerned about blood sugar control, you need to be really watching grains of all kinds, and certainly the more refined ones are a problem. To lower glycemic load, then more fiber in the meal is helpful, but also a source of healthy fat in the meal, okay, is a good thing and will help to lower the rise in blood sugar after the meal. So we were going to talk a little bit about inflammation and an anti-inflammatory diet. It turns out that the fat that we eat and the fat that's on our body both contribute to inflammation. And inflammation is correlated to lots of different chronic diseases. So when we follow an anti-inflammatory diet, we will feel better, and we will have a lower chance of these chronic diseases. To adhere to an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, we want to avoid excess weight, especially the kind that's in the middle, okay, which is so common as we get older. We also want to reduce fatty foods, but as much as reducing fatty foods, we want to think about the ones that we're choosing. So to minimize fried and the savory snack foods and fast foods, go easy on things like salad dressings, and certainly cut down on sweets that have fats in them. With regard to salad dressings, I think it's a great idea to, I'm actually kind of cautious about most salad dressings. I think it's a good idea to try to get into using an extra virgin olive oil and just tossing it lightly through your vegetables before you put on, you know, your lemon, lime, or your vinegar, or the sour part. When you mix up a salad dressing ahead of time, I've noticed that it takes a lot more to coat the leaves. Have any of you had that experience? So another thing about extra virgin olive oil, I like to spend a lot of money on a really good one, because then I'm a lot more cautious about how much I use. So consider that. In terms of reducing inflammation, we know that seafood, fish and seafood, are quite helpful because they're rich in those omega-3 fatty acids that have anti-inflammatory properties. So the guideline is to have fish or seafood 2 or 3 times a week if possible. But do be careful of farmed salmon. It was kind of discouraging to see an EPA warning that suggested that we limit farmed salmon to 1 serving per month. And the serving was a 3-ounce serving, which is the size of a deck of cards. So, you know, go easy. And then plenty of those plant foods that we talked about that have those anti-inflammatory compounds in them. So I'd like you to think a little bit about fat balance.
Before we move off that, is it just farmed salmon or any farmed fish?
Farmed salmon was the one that was specifically pointed out, but I think that's an interesting question that we probably need to look into a little bit more. In terms of the pro-inflammatory fats, the ones that are pro-inflammatory tend to be corn, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, and safflower type oils. So, you know, we've always thought of those as being heart healthy, and in moderation they're fine, but they do tend to be more pro-inflammatory, so we want to be a little cautious. And we need to decrease our intake of meat and fish that are fed these, speaking of farmed, okay, because farmed fish often are fed grains, soy, corn, and things like that. It's not that these polyunsaturated fats are inherently bad, it's the amount of them that we're eating. We're getting like, it's almost 16 to 1 if you think about these pro-inflammatory fats to the anti-inflammatory fats. And so rather than just eating tons and tons of fish to try to get up to the amount of polyunsaturated, you know, that we need, I think the idea is to try to cut down excessive intake of these polyunsaturated so that we get in a better balance in terms of pro and anti-inflammatory. The anti-inflammatory fats are found in fish, seafood, flaxseed, and the pasture-raised livestock. So you hear a lot about grass-fed cattle, for example, as being a better source of these healthier fats. It's good to realize that all cattle is grass-fed in general until it's taken into the feedlot and fed corn and soy, which then changes the carcass fat to a more pro-inflammatory carcass fat. So what we're seeing is now entering the marketplace are more what they're calling grass-finished cattle, which means they're fed grass until they're killed. And really, up until about 100 years ago, that's the way that beef was. So we have really changed the fat that's in the meat that we eat, which then becomes us. So we need to shift this back in a healthier balance. Here's some general guidelines on fats. I think that we want to realize that while at one point we were trying to cut our fats way, way, way down. Do you all remember this, what's it called? I want to say Stay-Well, but that's not Snack-Well. You know what? Snack-Well. Thank you. Back when I started at the Cancer Center in the middle 90s, we were very focused on a very low-fat diet as being the very best diet for chronic disease prevention. And the food manufacturers, you know, took us up on that and cut fat way down in processed food, but then added a lot of carb to it. So that isn't necessarily a good thing for our health. What we really want to do is have a moderate intake of fat, probably up to 30% of our calories is fine, but then we want to choose fats carefully. So one of the things that we want to think about is fat-soluble contaminants. And when we're eating animals that have a long lifespan, they've had a lot of time to get contaminants and concentrate those in their fat mass. So a good general guideline is to eat lower on the food chain, which would mean smaller animals with a shorter lifespan. Okay, think chickens. Okay, I brought my sardines. Okay, so if you're thinking about seafood, I'm a big proponent of sardines. These are little fish that don't live too long. So in general, you don't get quite as much buildup of toxins that are found out there in the environment. I mentioned about farmed fish. When you can afford organic, that is a way of reducing your exposure to fat-soluble contaminants. And one other thing, though, I don't see people that have a lot of weight to lose here, but if you know somebody that's tempted to go on one of these very extreme diets and lose weight quickly, when you're losing weight at greater than 2 pounds in a week, you are dumping a whole lot of stored environmental toxins out of your fat mass, probably at a time when you're also not taking in adequate amounts of nutrients that would be required for your detoxification systems to be working optimally. So rapid weight loss is generally not a good plan from that standpoint. Saturated fats and hydrogenated fats, or fats that are hard at room temperature, we really need to moderate our intake of those as much as possible. So limiting or avoiding full-fat dairy and red meats is still a good plan, and avoiding processed foods that are made with those. And then rancid fats are another thing that just add oxidative stress to our body. So aged cheeses, aged meats, and deli meats, it's good to really cut those back as much as you can. The healthy fats are the ones listed here. So the healthiest fat is actually fats that's found in a whole food. So that's where nuts and seeds come in, avocado, even eating, olives, even better than olive oil, for example. But the monounsaturated fats, which, avocado and olive oil sort of are the ones we most think about, are still considered good choices. This was just recently published last year, and this was kind of interesting in terms of the type of fats. And this was looking at, they call folks over 65 older or elderly, so I'm one of those, and this term elderly kind of bothers me, but let's just say seniors, I guess. This was a big group, and this was from the Women's Health Study, and they were evaluating the types of fats that women were eating, and higher saturated fat intake was associated over the period of the study with more cognitive decline and problems with memory than in those that had a higher monounsaturated fat intake. So that's just kind of one more reason to be careful of the types of fats that we eat. In terms of osteoporosis prevention or trying to maintain a good bone mass, weight-bearing exercise we know is important. Adequate calcium intake, adequate vitamin D. We actually need to get enough protein because we kind of forget that our bones really are made of protein matrix in which, minerals are placed. And it turns out that potassium is another important mineral in terms of bone health. And the things we need to be careful of are excess caffeine. You've probably read that a little caffeine is actually good for our memories, but we don't want to have more than 300 milligrams per day, which if you do kind of light coffee, that would be like 3 cups. If you do kind of the stronger espresso type, less than that. Being too thin is not a good thing in terms of osteoporosis. Cigarette smoking, we know, puts us at risk, and certainly excess sodium or salt, which makes us lose more calcium through the kidneys. So this is a little hard to read, but we need to get 1,200 milligrams of calcium in per day. I'd like you to see where you get it from food, because there's a tendency, I think, for people to kind of forget what they're getting from food, especially if they're not, doing milk products on a regular basis, and thinking that they need to supplement all of that on a regular basis. So if you're doing milk products, it's pretty easy to get there, but you might need to still supplement a little bit. A couple of things that you might notice here. I mean, cheddar cheese wouldn't be the greatest choice because it's high in saturated fat. Probably a good choice would be a 1 or 2% or non-fat milk, which is going to give you 300 milligrams per cup. And if you think about, say you had cereal and a little milk in your coffee in the morning, and maybe a yogurt during the day, you might get 600 just from milk products. And then you could think, okay, are there other things I could eat to sort of fill in around that? And maybe you don't quite get to 1,200, but if you're routinely not getting to 1,200, then you do a little bit of calcium supplementation. But don't feel like you need to go out and use the whole 1,200 as a supplement. Did you notice sardines there in the middle? 140 milligrams in this can. Okay, but you've got to eat the bones, and the same with salmon or mackerel. Now they have the canned salmon without the bones, but it's the bones that are going to give you the calcium, so you want to chew on those bones. Tofu that's made with calcium salts is also a good source of calcium. But there are many types of tofu on the market that are not made with calcium salts, so you do want to read your nutrition label and make sure that you're getting the type that actually has calcium in it. And then your leafy greens like kale are going to give you some calcium also, but you just need bigger portions. But that, that adds in a little bit. And I don't know if you like corn tortillas, but corn tortillas that are actually made in the traditional way with lime, if you had 5 corn tortillas made with lime through the day, you'd get as much calcium as a cup of milk. So, we don't think of corn tortillas as being a source of calcium, but actually they are. So, say you're using a non-milk beverage, like a soy milk or a rice milk or something else. You really want to look at your nutrition facts label. And just keep in mind that the daily value for calcium with regard to a label is 1,000 milligrams. So if it says 30% daily value, per serving for calcium, it's easy to do the math. 30% of 1,000 is 300 milligrams. Some of the others are a little more challenging. But there are plenty of soy milks that I've seen, like at Trader Joe's, that are not calcium fortified. So, you need to make sure that if you're not using dairy milk and you're using some kind of substitute, and you need or you want to get calcium from that substitute, read your label and make sure that it has calcium in it. Now, a couple of things about calcium supplements that I just think are good to realize. The common form of calcium supplement is calcium carbonate. And calcium carbonate, as in Tums, lowers stomach acidity. So if you're using a lot of calcium carbonate and not getting calcium from food, you could be affecting stomach acidity, which then affects how well the enzymes in your stomach are able to digest food. And you might actually experience a little bit of gas because you're not digesting things as well as you could. So I'm not a big fan of calcium carbonate. If I'm going to supplement, I tend to recommend calcium citrate as a form of calcium that's closer to what's often found in food. And if you are going to use a calcium supplement to kind of plug in the holes that are missing from calcium in your diet, then I think it's really a good idea to get a calcium that also has some vitamin D in it and probably a little bit of magnesium, because that would be more similar, it's closer to what you'd be getting in a food. In terms of calcium magnesium, probably at least half as much magnesium as the calcium. So if it was 500 milligrams of calcium, it would need to have like 250 of magnesium or something like that. So keep that in mind. One other thing, because there's a tendency to want to kind of get the calcium down, you know, at one time and just you're done with it. But you actually absorb it better with small amounts over time. So try not to take more than 500 milligrams at a time, if possible. There's a lot of interaction with different drugs. So again, using a little bit of calcium to make sure we get that 1,200 milligrams a day is a good idea, but realize that you don't want to be using more calcium than you need, and some of the drugs that you take may also be impacted. And one other thing that recently has come to our attention is that taking a big bolus of calcium at one time may not be a good idea in terms of cardiovascular risk. So this may not turn out to be a real worry, but there's been a few articles recently that lead us to at least be cautious. You know, and I've done a lot of counseling of women over the years, and you know, sometimes people are using 2,000 milligrams, you know, just like all at one time. So smaller amounts, think about what you're getting in your food, add a little bit just to kind of top it off is a good plan. And acids are used very commonly in our culture today, and acids reduce stomach acidity, that's why we use them, which affects calcium absorption. And there has been some correlation with higher hip fracture risk. So, you know, just keep that in mind. You know, if you need to use antacids, then that's important to do. But I'm really upset when I see these advertisements. Have you seen these on television where they're telling you to use an antacid so you can eat a corn dog? And like I'm going, I don't think so. So, you know, judicious use. Lots of interesting information coming out all the time on vitamin D. Population studies link vitamin D deficiency to autoimmune diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, dementia, infectious disease, etc. But the Institute of Medicine said that right now the literature only completely supports its benefit in terms of musculoskeletal health. So what we want to do is make sure that we have adequate levels of vitamin D floating around in our body, and most of the time physicians are checking that more routinely than they used to, because as older people we are more at risk for lower levels of vitamin D. We don't make as much vitamin D with exposure to sun, for example, and most of us aren't even going out in the sun because we're concerned about skin cancer, or if we do, we're putting sunscreen on, and that would block the production of vitamin D. So as older folks, we need at least 600 units per day of vitamin D. It seems to be safe to take up to 4,000 units. I would always err on the side of caution, so I don't think that I would push the envelope to go all the way up there. Probably, you know, 1,000 or 2,000 is okay, but, you know, remember that 600 is what we are recommended to be taking on a daily basis. And the D3 is a more biologically active form, and there are more supplements that come in that form than there used to be. This issue, again, about high doses, which they have done sometimes if blood levels are very low, they'll give you like a bolus dose to try to get it up. But that actually was shown to increase fracture risk in older women in a recent couple of studies. So again, it seems better to be using lower doses. If your levels are low, you're under a doctor's care anyway, and you'll be given, you know, a recommended amount to be taking, and then you'll be rechecked. But do pay attention to your vitamin D levels. It's important for calcium absorption and magnesium absorption. Calcium we think of for bone health, but magnesium is another one that's incredibly important for nerve transmission and muscle contraction. So if we're low in D, we're not absorbing either one of those two nutrients well. This whole issue of our Western-style diet and its impact over time on acid-base balance is something that we need to be thinking about, because the way that we're eating today, a high animal protein diet that's high in grains, tends to have a more kind of acidifying potential. And this acid-producing diet is associated with more osteoporosis, with high blood pressure, kidney stones, and problems with kidney function over time. If you think about eating a lot of grains and animal foods, and especially think about how your diet may have changed over time. I think as we get older, we may not want to cook as much. Sometimes if you're hungry at night, you might just sit down and have some cereal rather than do a dinner that has vegetables, for example. So we're displacing vegetables with grain, and that has a more acidifying potential in our body. And animal foods are also, they have a more acidifying potential as well. In terms of protein, we need to get an adequate amount. We just don't want to get too much. So I think this is in your handout so that you can check for yourself to see how much you need. But if you're an active adult, you need 0.4 to 0.6 grams per pound of body weight. So you can kind of pick your weight there and find the range that's right for you. I usually just summarize that by saying somewhere between like 55 and 100 grams is probably the right range to be in. If you're a smaller person, lower side of that. If you're a bigger person, higher. If you're somebody who's working out at the gym and building muscles, you would need more. But for most of us, getting somewhere between 55 and 100 is probably what we're after. And that's important to get enough to keep, ourselves healthy. I mean, protein is important for building and repair, immune function, and even for our skeletal system. This, and I think this is in your handout also, how do you get that 50 or 100? Every ounce of cooked meat, fish, or poultry gives you 7 grams. So I just look at like my index finger, okay? If that was like a little slice of chicken, like a chicken finger or something, or chicken tender, that would be 1 ounce. So that's 7 grams there. And if I did 3 fingers, or a deck of cards, that would be 3 times 7 or 21. So if you have a couple of ounces at your lunchtime and maybe 3 ounces at dinner, you're going to get more than enough protein. You also get protein from things like pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds. Milk, yogurt, cheese would give you protein. You certainly get a little bit in grain. And I think what people forget is that they get protein even in vegetables. So there's a couple of grams of protein in every half a cup. And we forget about that. Now, if you just ate vegetables, the protein quality is not great, but we hardly ever just eat vegetables all by themselves. We tend to, mix it in with some other things. And as long as we get the complementary protein within about 3 to 5 hours, we're fine. So, again, moderation and variety is a good general guideline in terms of protein adequacy. This is an important slide that I'd like you to look at because the alkaline minerals are really important: calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And I think we're pretty comfortable now that we know where calcium comes from. Magnesium is a really important nutrient that we often are not getting enough of, and it's found in dark greens, in legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and milk products. And then potassium comes in fruits and vegetables and in other foods as well, but fruits and vegetables are particularly rich. And we need vitamin D to absorb both calcium and magnesium. I don't know if you heard the news I think it was a few months ago at this point, but there was this really interesting study that they did where they gave folks a pretty high dose of potassium citrate. And they found that actually it was beneficial in terms of improving bone density, bone structure, and fracture risk in healthy elderly folks, seniors over the age of 65. The recommended potassium intake is 4,700 milligrams per day. And believe me, you need to eat a lot of plant foods to get there, okay? A half a cup of fruit or vegetable is going to give you about 160 milligrams. A half cup of potato, preferably a sweet potato, so you get more carotenoids, is going to give you 425. And a half cup of cooked beans and legumes, about 310. So the more plant foods you eat, the more potassium is in your diet. And that's good for bone health, but it's also pretty important for things like blood pressure control. So I think that we really need to pay attention, again, to plant foods from the potassium standpoint. And when we eat plant foods and don't just depend on potassium supplements, then we're going to also be displacing things like too much grain, you know, or other sweet or processed foods, which probably would have less potassium and more sodium, okay? So, it's kind of too much information, right? Okay, I think we're just about ready for questions. Food and mood. This is just kind of want you to think about this a little bit. The nutrients that are very important in keeping our neurological systems optimally functioning include the B vitamins. And deficiency symptoms of B vitamins include irritability, quarrelsomeness, depression, vague fears, emotional instability, decreased ability to cope with life's problems, confusion, and forgetfulness. So, not to say that that's the key or the only thing, but if you notice any of those symptoms, just think about, have you been getting foods that are good sources of B vitamins, which include the leafy green vegetables, legumes, your mung beans, peas, beans, or lentils, whole grains, nuts and seeds, meat, fish, and poultry, and milk products. All good sources. And do any of you ever take brewer's yeast or nutritional yeast, like in a smoothie? No? Well, if you've never tried it, go to Sprouts, and in the bins, you know, they have flake nutritional yeast. It's kind of like a bright yellow color. It's a wonderful source of protein and B vitamins, and you can stir a little bit, you know, into a smoothie. You can put a little bit into a juice and get some extra B vitamins, and it really helps to nourish your nerves, and it's quite beneficial. B12 deficiency is something that we need to be on the lookout for. As we get older, we don't absorb B12 as well because the acidity in our stomach decreases. And there are some people that genetically actually lose intrinsic factor as they get older. And so we just need to be aware that this can happen. Deficiency symptoms include tiredness and weakness, forgetfulness and depression. You know, I don't mean to just say it can only be from B12, but it's one of the things to think about. There are folks, I actually had a really good friend, a very healthy looking woman who went to her doctor for a couple of years saying that she had numbness and tingling in her hands and feet. And this was around menopause time, and no one took blood, and everyone said it, you know, was probably just menopausal symptoms. And finally, 2 years later, they took blood and found out that she was B12 deficient. And she had a familial tendency to it. So you just need to, be aware that this can be a cause of some of these symptoms. Folks that are more at risk for B12 deficiency include people that do not eat any animal products, people that use too much alcohol, and then folks that don't absorb adequately, which it can include people that chronically use antacids, folks that have celiac disease, if you're overcooking meats, which we tend to do today because, we're worried about pathogens, folks with colitis or a short bowel syndrome. So it's just something to think about. And as promised, telomeres, okay, because you've been reading about those. So telomeres are the protective caps at the end of chromosomes, and each time a cell divides, the telomeres shrink. And it seems like our cells kind of have a lifespan, and when the telomeres get too short, that cell dies. So it turns out that psychological stress resilience, healthy lifestyle, and social connections are all really important to keeping healthy telomeres. And in terms of lifestyle, the things that are coming up in the literature that are helpful include physical activity, which includes aerobic activity, weight bearing, and then, holding on to lean body mass. Because again, that's what tends to go as we get older if we're not vigilant about it. Having a normal body composition is helpful, so not getting, too overweight and not getting too round around the middle. And then the dietary things that are helpful include a lot of the things we talked about: plant foods, fiber, adequate vitamins, the omega-3 fats, DHA and EPA, and lower intake of processed meats, and also lower intake of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. I kind of love this next bullet point, though. People that were preoccupied with trying to eat less, which are called high restraint folks, have higher cortisol, stress hormones, and shorter telomeres. So even though I've told you all kinds of things about the best diet to follow, don't get too stressed out about it, because that can, you'll lose the benefit. So the bottom line is eat food, and these come from Michael Pollan, these first three. I love that guy. Read all his books. He says eat food, not edible food-like products, not too much, and mostly plants. Great advice. Drink plenty of water. Look at, this is still how much I have. It was filled up. I haven't even had my 4 cups yet today, so I have a long way to go. Constantly, we need to be getting fluid flushing through us to get the toxins out. It's something that as we get older, we don't feel thirst, so we really have to count up the cups. Eat slower, exercise as I've talked about, and I like to say practice gratitude, okay, which helps to calm us down so we actually get the most benefit from the food. And I think it's really nice to take a minute before a meal. We used to say grace, but if we don't do grace, just think about what it took to bring that nourishing food, to your plate, and what it's going to do to protect your health. So I think that's a good part of this. As I mentioned, we have some clinical trials, so pick up brochures or flyers if you're interested on the way out. And these are the healthy living, eating and living guidelines that I talked about. It's a little bit small in your handout, but do work on maintaining a healthy weight, which right now is a BMI between 20 and 30. Enjoy a physically active lifestyle, which is 30 to 60 minutes of moderate activity per day. Do you wear your pedometers? Okay, yay, because we're trying to get to 10,000 steps every day, at least. Preserve muscle mass, which is really a hard one as we get older to keep in mind, but getting to the gym, lifting weights, doing upper body is really, really important. Getting plenty of these plant foods with big color and strong flavor, focusing on healthy fats, as we talked about, choosing carbohydrates carefully and trying to stay away from the processed types, and then selecting beverages carefully. So you'll notice that I'm not fond of fruit juices, okay, because they have a lot of carbs and no fiber. So better that you eat the fruit, and actually water or herbal teas are your best beverage choice. So I'm going to end it there, and thank you so much for listening, and I'll take questions. Okay, so he's asking about orange juice with pulp, and that's a better choice than orange juice without pulp, but even better is actually eating an orange, you know, and that means cutting some of that white inner peel, because that has those water-soluble fibers that are so good for, you know, the gut bacteria and your cholesterol levels. Okay? You were next. Okay? Okay, so he's talking about tomatoes. Great choice. Everything that is big color is good. Tomatoes are big color. Okay? So they're red and they're good for you. He's talking about tomatoes. Great choice. And actually, tomato puree or tomato sauce would even be, you know, a really great choice because it's more concentrated. So, yeah, excellent. And, you know, I didn't call out every single food that's good for you, but if it's got a big color, it's good. Tomatoes fall in that category. Okay, who else? Yes. Both chia and flaxseed are good sources of the omega-3 fatty acids, but the type of omega-3 that they have in them, which is alpha-linoleic acid, is not as biologically active as EPA and DHA, which are found in seafood. So if that's the source, if you're not doing seafood and you're getting most of your omega-3s from either chia or from flax, you just, especially with flax, you need to grind it, okay? Because it's got a really hard seed coat, which is very good for you, but if you don't break up the particles, it's going to go straight through you, okay? You actually need, let me just give you for 500 milligrams of omega-3 equivalent, you'd need about 3 tablespoons of flax meal. Okay, so you just would need like flax in your smoothie every morning to get what you need in terms of omega-3s. Okay, okay. Let me go over here. Somebody back here. Okay, he's asking about apples and bananas. There's no bad fruit or vegetable, and you know there's a lot to be said for apples. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. It's loaded with that soluble fiber that's so good for you. So it misses out on the carotenoids, but it has fiber. Bananas are a wonderful, wonderful source of magnesium and potassium. So you know, colorful is great, but all are good, okay, and have different things to offer. So those are 2 examples of less color, but still good, okay? And by the way, apples, the benefit, and you've always heard about leaving the skin on, but a lot of those healthy nutrients are either in the skin or right under the skin. And again, think about why. It's because the plant has put them there to protect the plant from damage from the environment. So if we're going to eat an apple and we cut away the skin, we've cut away some of the benefit. Okay? Okay. Over here?
So it's better to buy organic because of all the pesticides that are used?
I think it's great if you can afford organic, because I think that's actually ultimately going to change our food supply to a healthier food supply. We have really gone very far in a not healthy direction. So I would, let me also tell you about the Environmental Working Group website. Do you all know about the Environmental Working Group? So they have a very helpful website that lists produce in terms of its likelihood of having contaminants from the environment. And they have lists, you know, like the Dirty Dozen and the Safe Dozen, that sort of thing. But they pore over the literature on pesticide contamination of produce and do a wonderful service by posting that. So if you go to the ones that are most likely to be contaminated, then that's where you'd want to spend your money on organic, and then go to the bottom of the list, least likely, and maybe you don't have to spend the money on organic. Environmental Working Group. Yeah, if you just Google that, you'll find it. And speaking of websites, and I'll get to you, the other thing about omega-3s and fish and seafood, do you all know about the Monterey Bay Aquarium website? Because that's a wonderful website that talks about the safest fish and seafood choices also. They have purchasing guidelines that you can, actually just print out and put in your wallet. And they're concerned about contaminants, but they're also concerned about overfishing areas. So they'll tell you the safest choices, not only for health, but for the environment. Okay? Yes?
Could you talk about turmeric and using other spices like cinnamon and turmeric?
Okay, turmeric. So she's asking about spices. Big flavor. Big flavor is a good thing. So spices and herbs are always good to use as much of those as possible. She's asking about turmeric, which is very colorful. It's like a mustard color, and it's a primary ingredient in curries. It's actually, there's research indicating that it might have anti-cancer potential, and it has anti-inflammatory potential as well. Cinnamon has been shown to be beneficial in terms of diabetes care. So lots of interesting things with herbs and spices. The trick with like dried herbs, if you're going to use them, is buy small amounts and don't keep them till they have hardly any smell. So at Costco, they sell like Italian herbs in humongous containers, and it might take you a year to get through that container. You're so much better off going and buying a very small amount. So when you open the jar, it has like a pungent smell to it, which again, that smell is what tells you that there's biologically active compounds in it that are beneficial to your health. Okay? You had a question back here? So he's trying to get us to eat more lard and okay, so his question was the diet of his grandparents, which was higher in saturated fat and hydrogenated fat. And I think this is a valid point that you're making, but I'd like to think about also the environment in which our grandparents lived and grew up. So there was less contaminants that were getting into that saturated fat, for one thing. And the other thing is our grandparents did a lot more moving around than we do, a whole lot more moving around. So if we lived more like our grandparents, we probably could tolerate a less restrictive diet. So I think you make a good point. I think you're talking about any red meat, actually, because I think that we need to be doing a better job of moderation and variety, so smaller animals. But having said that, if we were living in Idaho or Montana or beef country, and that's what was available, I think that I think we have to eat what's available to us. Optimally, it's not a great idea to be getting lots of those saturated, the big animals, optimally. Okay? And you had a question?
Yeah, with the bigger animals.
Okay, so she's asking about small animals that are fed primarily corn and soy, like chickens. Okay? And I think that's a valid point. If we can, and we, chickens don't run around like they used to. Chickens that were in, that ran around would eat a variety of things, and they still would be eating corn, but if you think about it, they were also sometimes eating insects or they were eating worms, and when you squish a worm, green goo comes out of it. The green goo is from leaves, And the green goo is a source of omega-3 fatty acids. So chickens that ran around and ate that kind of stuff did have a different, carcass fat, you could say. All of what I'm telling you is kind of, we're moving in a direction. We're trying to make choices that are a little bit better for our health given what our food supply is. And so if I had to choose, between eating big hunks of, beef versus, little bit of chicken, I would still probably choose chicken. Having said that, my favorite winter stew, I got some grass-finished beef. I bought a half a pound of it because it was very expensive. I got a nice cut, so it wasn't just the stew meat, in terms of fat, cut up really tiny pieces, okay, sauteed it in olive oil with onions, and then I put in some chicken broth, organic. I threw in an entire bag of baby carrots, your tomatoes, okay, fire-roasted tomatoes with peppers. I chopped up a huge rutabaga, a huge turnip into bite-sized pieces. What else have I? Oh, and I put a can of beans in it, the white kidney beans or pinto beans or something. And I just let it cook for a couple of hours, till it was this nice kind of winter stew. And right before I served it, I emptied a bag of baby spinach and let it wilt over the top. Oh, and I also put a sweet potato in it. So do you see what I mean by a little bit of meat is fine? That served 4 people. So tons of color, lots of flavor, little bit of animal protein, some saturated fat, but altogether it was kind of this direction that we want to be moving in. Does that make sense? Okay, question over here.
You omitted the slide on dark chocolate and it's been...
Oh, darn it. Well, I'm a huge chocolate lover, so let me address that immediately. You want to try to get at least 70%, chocolate cocoa solids. And if you can go to 80, that would be great. One of the things that I have had to do as I've gotten older, I don't know if you're like this, but I've always loved chocolate chip cookies. But what did I love in the chocolate chip cookies? The chips. So now I don't eat chocolate chip cookies, I just go right for the chocolate. And, I go and buy really expensive, like, green and black, the organic chocolate. It's really expensive. And so it's organic. And I just love a couple of squares of it. And I savor it. And part of what we teach in healthy living is the 80-20 rule, So, okay, well, that's really an important rule. So 80% of the time you're good, and the other 20% you can blow it. But blow it with quality stuff. Okay, so that's really, and the other thing, a general rule is, if it gives you a great deal of joy, that is good, for longevity. So, make your chocolate count. Chocolate is a wonderful source of flavonoids, which are protective. They're anti-inflammatory. They're antioxidant. It has magnesium in it, which is good, I can say I'm going to eat my chocolate so I don't get leg cramps, like, oh well. So, yeah, chocolate is a very good choice. And again, I would say, if chocolate is what you like, eat the chocolate and not all the stuff around it, because most of us can't afford all those extra calories of the cookie part, or the cake part. Okay, I'm going to end it now, and if you want a book, come on up.